years ago, Yule was coming round, and as usual, you know, what does a coven do? Research. We wanted the most authentic Yule that we could come up with. So what we found, much to our surprise, is that, you know, contrary to what one might think with the Santa Claus monopoly that we have in this country, that in many places, one could even say most places across Europe, the one that brings gifts at that time of year is actually an old woman. She has different names in different places. In Italy, they actually admit that she's a witch. Her name is Befana. You know, she rides in on Epiphany on a broom and gives gifts. But not in Sicily, though. This is interesting. Okay, digression is inherent in polytheism, right? In Italy, the kids get their presents not at Yule, they get them at Samhain. At Samhain, good old Sicily, the kids set out their shoes, as they do in Southern Europe, for the dead. For the dead. And when the dead come, they leave presents and candy for the kids. Wow! Leave it to Sicily. That's great. But other places, you know, in the rest of Italy, it's Befana. In Russia, of course, it's Babushka, old grandma. In Germany, there are lots and lots and lots of different gift bringing. There's Mother Halda is one of them. Mother Halda. Let's see. Oh my. There are other names. Frau Percht is one of her names. In parts of Bavaria and in parts of the Bavarian Alps, she's called Berhta, the bright one. Seems to have been a washed up old goddess of, you know, fire or the hearth or the sun or moon or something like that. And she is the meanest and nastiest one of them all. She's got the 6 or 8 goat horns sticking out of her head. Mother Berhta doesn't usually bring gifts in this area. Instead, she comes and she looks in through the window. And they have these big scary masks. They look kind of like Kali. They've got the big red tongue sticking out. And she won't go away until you give her a gift. So anyway, we decided, having done this research, that for Minnesota, only the meanest and the nastiest of all could possibly be worthy of the Minnesota climate. So that's where Mother Berhta came from, and all the rest is history. She comes riding in on her goat, Nasherskegi, who's her, well, yeah, enough said about that. My. And here's the story. Long ago on Mother Night, the night they call Mother Night because it's the night that gives birth to all the rest of the nights of the year, people would get together and they'd build the big fire, they'd put the Yule log on the hearth, and they'd tell stories and they'd sing and they'd, you know, wave their hands in the air and all talk at once, just like pagans usually do. And, you know, sooner or later, at some point, you would, you know, out there far over the snow, you'd hear the jingling of bells and the jingling of bells, and they'd get louder and louder and louder, and then they'd stop right outside your door, and the door would go flying open. Wham! And in comes Mother Berhta, just as mean and nasty as ever, 6 or 8 horns sticking out of her head, big long beard, mustache, long tail. In she'd come and she'd say, "Good Yule, you assholes!" And she'd come in, and she'd take her old stinky goatskin sack, and she'd open it up, and she'd start pulling out the presents. Now these were not presents like you get these days, because Mother Berhta didn't bring you what you wanted for Yule. Mother Berhta brought you what you deserved. So it was way scarier. You never knew what it was going to be. And when she brought out the gifts, then she'd start pulling out the food. She'd pull out plum pudding. She'd pull out mashed yams. She'd pull out turkey. She'd pull out everybody's favorite foods out of that stinky old goatskin sack. Yuck. And then she'd say, "Hey, Skeggy, come on in, you old goat." Her goat Nasher, her stinky old goat Nasher Skeggy would come right into the living room. Oh well, you're going to tell Mother Berhta she can't bring her goat into your house? I don't think so. So the stinky old goat comes in. She says, "Come here, you old goat." So she takes the goat by the horns and she pulls his head back like this. And then she takes her athame out like this. And then she cuts him right across the throat. Right there in the middle of your living room. Good old Mother Berhta. So then she guts them, and she takes the skin off, and she chops them up into little pieces, throws them in the big cauldron that, of course, in those old days was always bubbling there on the fire that never goes out. Little onion, little fresh basil if you had any, sun-dried tomatoes, whatever it is you had in the house. Cook, stir, goat stew. She'd ladle it out. Everybody would say, what else did they dare say? "Oh, Mother Berhta, this is the best goat stew ever." So she'd ladle out the goat stew, but before she did that, before anybody could take a bite of the goat stew, she'd throw the stinky old goatskin sack down on the floor, and she would say to everybody, "Throw the bones in here, but don't break any." So they'd eat the goat stew, and they'd throw the bones in the sack. When everybody was finished, she'd pick up the sack and she'd shake it and she'd say, "Come on out, you old goat." And sure enough, out would come Nasher Skeggy the goat, all put back together and live again, capering out just as lively and as randy as ever. So she'd jump on his back and she'd throw her sack over her shoulder and she'd say, "Good Yule, you assholes!" And she'd ride off into the night. You'd hear the bells going off into the snow. There it was. So year after year, that's how it was, century after century, millennium after millennium, the bells over the snow, the long blue light. Wham! The door flies open. "Good Yule, you assholes! Come here, you old goat!" So she takes out, then she cuts his throat. Then she throw the bones in here, but don't break any. There she shakes the sack. "Come on out, you old goat!" He comes out. "Good Yule, you assholes!" Off she goes. So that's the way it was, year after year after year after year. So one year, the usual, "Good Yule, you assholes! Throw the bones in here, but don't break any." Oh, but there was one, I think it was a little boy, might have been a little girl, I don't know, nobody remembers the name of this kid anymore, who broke, one of the bones, throw the bones in here, but don't break any, who broke one of the bones to suck the hot marrow out of it. Ooh, it was very good. So that when Mother Berhta shook the sack and hollered, "Come on out, you old goat!" Oh, out limps poor old Nasher Skeggy on just 3 legs, looking not at all happy. And all those hundreds of thousands of years, nobody had ever seen Mother Berhta that mad before. She grabbed Nasher Skeggy. She threw him over one shoulder. And then she grabbed the little boy, or the little girl, I don't know which it was, and nobody remembers this kid's name anymore, because of course Mother Berhta knew who had broken the bone, and stuffed him or her into the sack. She threw the sack over the other shoulder, and she said, "You idiots, now I have to carry my goat instead of riding him," which is where that saying comes from, of course. And she threw Skeggy over one shoulder, and she threw her sack over the other shoulder, and she stormed out into the night. So now, Mother Berhta comes riding in on the eve of the winter solstice, and you hear the bells coming across the snow in the long blue light. And the door flies open, and Mother Berhta comes stomping in. You don't know whether for sure when she opens the sack she's going to take toys out, or whether she's going to stuff kids in. And that's the end of the story, and that's the beginning of the story, and let us all say, Mother Berhta.